I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew my life. But one sentence from a stranger destroyed everything I believed. Your husband made a huge mistake. And when I realized who that stranger really was, my knees nearly gave out. If you enjoy real-life emotional stories with shocking twists, make sure you subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. I never believed in signs, not the kind people talk about in movies or viral videos. Life, to me, had always been practical, logical, predictable. I was married for 12 years, 2 kids, a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago, a husband who worked long hours and came home tired but polite. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, or so I thought. That morning started like any other Tuesday. I dropped my kids at school, stopped for gas, and decided to grab a coffee before heading home. The cafe near the highway wasn't special. Chipped tables, soft jazz music, the smell of burnt espresso. I remember checking my phone, scrolling through unread messages, when a man sat down across from me, without asking. Late 40s, neatly dressed, but not expensive. Sharp eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. At first, I thought he had mistaken me for someone else. Then he spoke. You deserve to know, he said calmly. I frowned. Excuse me. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. Your husband made a huge mistake. The air left my lungs. I laughed nervously. I think you have the wrong person. I don't, he replied, and I'm not here to hurt you. I stood up, heart pounding. This is inappropriate. But his next words froze me in place. Mark doesn't work late on Thursdays. No one knew my husband's schedule like that, not even some of our friends. I sat back down, my hands were shaking. Who are you? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid his phone across the table. On the screen was a photo. My husband's car, parked outside an apartment building I'd never seen before, taken last Thursday. You followed him, I whispered. He shook his head. I didn't need to. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but something in his voice wasn't cruel. It was heavy, almost regretful. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He finally met my eyes. Because he made the same mistake with you that he made with someone else years ago. My stomach dropped. What mistake? The man exhaled slowly. Lying to the wrong woman. I felt dizzy. Look, I said, trying to stay calm. If this is some kind of scam, it's not, he interrupted gently. And I wish it were. He paused, then said something that made my chest tighten. I used to trust him too. I stared at him. You know my husband. Yes, he said quietly, and not in the way you think. The cafe suddenly felt too loud, too bright. How? I asked. He hesitated, then stood up. Not here, he said. If you want the truth, meet me tomorrow. He slid a folded piece of paper toward me. An address, a time. Then he added one last sentence, the one that haunted me all night. When you find out who I really am, you'll understand why I couldn't stay silent. And just like that, he walked out, leaving my untouched coffee and my entire marriage cracking at the seams. I didn't tell my husband what happened that morning. Mark came home that evening like he always did, loose-end tie, polite smile, tired eyes. He kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner, and complained about traffic on the interstate. And I watched him. Really watched him. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every word sounded practiced, like he was reading lines from a script he'd memorized years ago. That night, after the kids were asleep, he sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through his phone. You okay? He asked casually. Just tired, I said. It was the truth, but not the whole truth, because exhaustion wasn't what kept me awake that night. Fear did. The stranger's words played on repeat in my head. Your husband made a huge mistake. He made the same mistake with someone else. When you find out who I really am. At 2:14 a.m., Mark rolled over and started snoring softly. I reached for his phone. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure it would wake him. I knew his past 12 years of marriage meant there were no secrets, or at least, that's what I used to believe. I unlocked the screen. Nothing obvious, no suspicious messages, no hidden apps, no late-night calls. Almost too clean. Then I remembered the photo. The apartment building. At 3:06 a.m., I opened my laptop and typed the address from the folded paper into Google Maps. My hands trembled. The building was real modern brick exterior, gated parking. Not cheap. And not anywhere near his office. I zoomed in on the street view, staring at the balconies, the windows, the quiet street. Who lived there? And more importantly, Why had my husband been there? The next morning, I watched Mark leave for work like everything was normal. He grabbed his coffee, reminded me about a dinner we had planned with neighbors on Saturday, and told me he loved me. I love you too, I replied. The words felt heavy in my mouth. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the address again. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I knew one thing. I couldn't unhear what that man had said. Then met Yandy the next day. I told Mark I was meeting a friend for lunch. Instead, I drove to the address. It was a small park just outside the city, quiet, almost forgotten. A few benches, bare trees, a walking trail looping around a pond. The stranger was already there. Same neat jacket, same calm posture. He stood when he saw me. You came, he said. I almost didn't, I replied. You don't get to drop a bomb like that and disappear. I know, he said softly. That's why I asked you here. I crossed my arms, start talking. He didn't rush. Instead, he gestured toward the bench. Sit, he said. This isn't a short story. I sat. My name is Daniel, he began. And before you ask, no, I'm not here to steal anything from you. I laughed bitterly. You already stole my peace of mind. He nodded. That wasn't my intention. But the truth rarely arrives gently. I stared at the pond. How do you know my husband? Daniel took a breath. About 16 years ago, he said. Mark wasn't married. He was ambitious, charming, and very good at making promises he had no intention of keeping. My chest tightened. Daniel continued. He dated my sister. I turned sharply. Your sister? Yes, he said. Her name was Rebecca. Something about the way he said her name slowly, carefully made my throat burn. They were serious, Daniel said. At least, she thought they were. What happened? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Daniel's jaw tightened. He disappeared, he said. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. I swallowed hard. She found out later, he continued, that she wasn't the only one. My hands clenched into fists. She was pregnant, he said quietly. The world stopped. I'm sorry, I whispered. She lost the baby, Daniel added. Stress, heartbreak, a lot of unanswered questions. I closed my eyes. And you? I asked. Why now? Daniel met my gaze. Because last month, he said, I saw Mark again. My heart slammed against my ribs. Where? At a conference, he replied. Different city, different life, same man. I shook my head. That doesn't explain the apartment, or the photo. Daniel hesitated. He didn't just disappear back then, he said. He reinvented himself. My pulse raced. And he's doing it again, Daniel added. I felt sick. Are you saying he's cheating? I asked that. Daniel shook his head slowly. I'm saying, he replied, that he's preparing an exit. The words cut deeper than I expected. He's planning to leave me, I whispered. He's planning something, Daniel said. And you deserve to know before it's too late. I stood up abruptly. You expect me to believe all this based on your word? Daniel reached into his bag. I expected that, he said. He handed me a folder. Inside were documents, printed emails, photos, legal papers, and one name I recognized instantly by husband's. But beneath it, another name, one I'd never seen before. I stared at the name printed beneath my husband's. Not Mark Thompson, not the man I married, not the father of my children. It was another name, entirely, a legal name. One that didn't belong to the life we had built together. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages in the folder Daniel had handed me. Each sheet felt heavier than the last, like it carried a piece of truth I wasn't ready to hold. What is this? I asked, my voice barely steady. Daniel didn't rush me. He let the silence stretch, like he knew I needed time to breathe. That, he said finally, is who your husband was before he became Mark. I felt my chest tighten. You're telling me my husband isn't even using his real name? I asked. He is, Daniel replied carefully. And he isn't. I looked up sharply. That makes no sense. It will, he said, just not all at once. I sank back onto the bench, clutching the folder like it might disappear if I let go. The documents included an old driver's license copy, a business filing from another state, a property lease agreement, all connected by that same unfamiliar name. This isn't identity theft, Daniel said, anticipating my thought. It's reinvention. I shook my head. People don't just reinvent themselves. Not legally. They do when they leave things behind they don't want following them, he replied. My mind raced. Rebecca, I said quietly. Your sister. Did she know about this? Daniel's jaw tightened again. She learned after he disappeared, he said, too late to confront him, too late to get answers. I felt a lump form in my throat. And now, I asked, why show me this now? Because he's doing it again, Daniel repeated. And this time, you're the one being left in the dark. I flipped to the last page in the folder. It was a lease agreement, the same apartment from the photo. My breath caught. His name is on this, I said. Yes. Daniel replied. Signed 2 months ago. 2 months? I did the math without meaning to. 2 months ago, Mark had started acting different. More distant, more guarded. 2 months ago, he started working late on Thursdays. I felt foolish. How do you even know all this? I asked. Daniel hesitated before answering. Because I've been looking for him for years, he said, not for revenge, for closure. I stared at him. And you just happened to find him again. I wasn't looking anymore, he admitted, until he showed up right in front of me. My hands shook as I closed the folder. So what? I said bitterly. You decided to warn the next woman he'd ruin. Daniel met my eyes, his expression steady but heavy. No, he said, I decided to warn the woman who still has time. The denially drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the sound of my own breathing in the folder resting on the passenger seat like a living thing. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had convinced myself of one thing. There had to be another explanation. Mark wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a monster. He coached our son's baseball team. He helped our daughter with math homework. He remembered our anniversary every year. Men like that didn't live double lives, right? That night, I watched him carefully. He laughed at the kids' jokes. He asked about my day. He complained about a coworker. Normal, familiar. Comforting. Until I noticed his phone. Face down on the counter. He never did that before. You're quiet, he said later as we got into bed. Just tired, I replied. Again, the truth, but not the whole truth. When his breathing slowed, I rolled onto my side and stared into the darkness. I didn't want to believe Daniel. I didn't want to open doors I couldn't close, but I also couldn't ignore what I had seen the next morning. I followed him. I'd never done anything like that before. I told myself it was just to ease my mind, just to prove Daniel wrong. Mark left the house at 7:30 a.m. Just like always, I waited 5 minutes, then got into my car. I kept my distance, my heart pounding with every turn. He didn't drive toward his office. He took the highway exit he only used on Thursdays. My stomach dropped. 20 minutes later, he pulled into the gated parking lot of the apartment building, the same one from the photo. I parked across the street and watched as he got out of the car. He didn't look nervous. He looked comfortable, like he belonged there. Then the door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was younger than me, not dramatically, maybe early 30s, well-dressed, confident. She smiled when she saw him, and my husband smiled back. Not the polite smile he gave strangers, not the tired smile he gave me, but the smile he used to give me when we first fell in love. My vision blurred. They hugged, not a friendly hug, a familiar one. My hands clenched around the steering wheel. I waited for anger, for rage. But what I felt instead was something colder. Recognition. This wasn't new, this was practiced. He kissed her forehead, said something that made her laugh, and they walked inside together. The door closed behind them, and with it, the last piece of denial I had left. The realizzazione sat in my car for nearly an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the building and thought about Daniel's words. He's preparing an exit. This wasn't an affair. This was a replacement, a backup life, a clean break waiting to happen. When I finally drove away, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet, because before I did, I needed to know who he really was, and why Daniel looked so haunted when he said he trusted him once too. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's smile, not the one he wore at home, but the one he gave her, easy, familiar, intimate. By morning, my fear had hardened into something else, resolve. If my husband had built another life, I needed to understand how, and more importantly, how far back the lies went. After dropping the kids at school, I didn't go home. I went to the county records office. I told myself it was just curiosity, just information, but deep down, I knew this was the point of no return. Searched his name first. Mark Thompson. Marriage record. mortgage, tax, filings. Clean, perfect. Too perfect. Then I searched the other name, the one from Daniel's folder. My hands shook as I typed it in. And there it was. A trail. Different state, different city, different woman. My breath caught as I scrolled. Business registrations, a dissolved LLC, a property sale from 15 years ago, and then a marriage license. My heart slammed. He had been married before, legally. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Mark had told me once that he'd had a serious relationship before me, nothing more. No marriage, no legal ties. I printed everything. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a long time, staring at the stack of papers in my lap. 12 years of marriage, and I was only now learning I was his second wife. But Callie didn't call Mark. Instead, I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "You found something," he said. "Yes," I replied. He was married. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I was afraid you'd find that." "You knew?" I asked sharply. "I suspected," he said. "Rebecca never got the full truth, but there were signs." I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to discover it yourself," he replied gently, "so you'd believe it." I hated that he was right. "Who was she?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "Her name was Linda," he said. "She left the state after everything fell apart." "Did she know about Rebecca?" I asked. "No," he replied. "And Rebecca didn't know about her." My chest ached. "How does someone do that?" I whispered. "How does someone lie so completely?" Daniel's voice softened. "Because he doesn't see it as lying," he said. "He sees it as survival." The confrontation that didn't happen that evening. Mark came home earlier than usual. "Thought I'd surprise you," he said, setting takeout on the counter. I smiled, a calm, practiced smile I didn't recognize as my own. "That's sweet," I said. That we ate dinner like a normal couple. We talked about the kids, about work, about nothing that mattered. And the whole time, I studied him, to his hands, his voice, the way he avoided eye contact when his phone buzzed. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked casually, "Did you ever think about moving somewhere else, starting over?" He froze for just a second, barely noticeable. But I saw it. "Why?" he asked. "No reason," I said lightly. "Just curious." He shrugged. "This is home." The lie slid off his tongue effortlessly. That night, after he fell asleep, I went into his office. I opened drawers I'd never touched before. At the back of the bottom drawer, beneath old files and cables, I found a small lockbox. My heart pounded. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried our anniversary. Click. Inside were documents. A passport. Not the one I knew. Bank statements from an account I'd never seen, and a burner phone. My hands shook as I turned it on. One unread message: "We're still on for Thursday. I can't wait." No name. No signature. Just confirmation. My husband wasn't thinking about leaving someday. He was planning it. The stranger's real, ROL, lie. The next morning, I met Daniel again. This time, I brought the lockbox. When I showed him the contents, his face fell. "He's further along than I thought," he said. "What aren't you telling me?" I demanded. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he said the words that changed everything. "I didn't just run into your husband by accident." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I was hired," he said quietly. "Hired?" My voice rose. "By who?" Daniel hesitated. Then he met my eyes. "By the woman he's planning to leave you for." The world tilted. She wanted to know who he really was, Daniel continued, before she trusted him completely. I laughed bitterly. "So I'm not the only one being warned." "No," he said, "but you're the only one with the full picture." I felt sick. "Does she know about me?" I asked. "Yes," Daniel replied, "but not the whole truth." I clenched my fists. "She thinks you're already drifting apart," he added. "She thinks she's saving him." The irony burned. Daniel leaned forward. "You still have the power here," he said, "but only if you act before he does." I looked down at the documents, the phone, the passport. 12 years of lies. 2 families, 2 identities, 2 exits. And suddenly, the stranger who warned me didn't feel like an intruder anymore. He felt like the only honest person in the room. I didn't confront him. Not after the lockbox. Not after the burner phone. Not even after learning the woman he planned to leave me for had hired Daniel to investigate him. Instead, I did something far more dangerous. I stayed quiet, because silence, I learned, is the most powerful weapon when the other person thinks they're winning. For the first time in 12 years, I stopped being the wife who reacted. I became the wife who observed. Every morning, I kissed Mark goodbye like nothing had changed. I packed lunches, helped with homework, laughed at his jokes. I even let him believe I was distracted, tired, unengaged. Exactly the version of me he expected when he started planning his escape. But behind that calm surface, I was preparing. The first thing I did was visit a lawyer. Not a dramatic one, not a courtroom shark, a quiet woman named Suzanne, who listened more than she spoke. I told her everything. The second identity, the apartment, the lockbox, the burner phone. She didn't look shocked. She looked concerned. Your husband isn't just cheating, she said carefully. He's positioning himself. For what? I asked. To leave without losing much, she replied, and possibly without you knowing the full extent of what he's taken. My chest tightened. Taken. Susan slid a document across the desk. Men who live double lives usually prepare financially first, she said. We need to find out what he's moved. That night, while Mark slept beside me, I logged into our accounts, and my heart sank. Small amounts had been disappearing for months, not enough to notice, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to build something, quietly, another life, another future, without me. A week later, Daniel called me. She wants to meet you, he said. I laughed, sharp and bitter. That takes nerve. She doesn't know everything, Daniel replied, but she's starting to sense something's wrong. I thought about it all night, then I said yes. We met at a cafe across town. She was exactly how I imagined. Polished, intelligent, nervous. She recognized me immediately. I'm so sorry, she said before I even sat down. I studied her face. She wasn't smug. She wasn't cruel. She was scared. You didn't steal my husband, I said calmly. You just believed his version of the truth. Her eyes filled with tears. He said you were growing apart, she whispered, that you stayed together for the kids. I nodded. He told me he was working late. Silence stretched between us. I hired Daniel because something felt off, she admitted. He wouldn't talk about his past. I leaned forward. Did he tell you his real name? I asked. Her face went pale. No, she said slowly. I slid a copy of the documents across the table. She read them, and when she looked up, her hands were shaking. He said he wanted to start over, she whispered. He always does, I replied. That was the moment I realized something important. Mark didn't choose weak women. He chose trusting ones. The woman, her name was Emily, didn't want revenge. She wanted out, but I wanted something else. Closure, protection, and control. With Susan's guidance, I began documenting everything. Dates, messages, transactions. I secured copies of every account, every asset. I opened a separate account in my name. Quietly, legally. I wasn't stealing. I was safeguarding. Mark grew more distant, more distracted. He thought he was ahead. He didn't know I was already 3 steps past him. One evening, I tested him. I've been thinking, I said casually over dinner, maybe we should sell the house someday, start fresh. His fork paused midair. Why would we do that? He asked, forcing a smile. I don't know. I shrugged. Change can be good. His jaw tightened. We're fine, he said quickly. No need for big decisions. There it was. The panic. He didn't want me changing anything, because his plan depended on me staying exactly where I was. Predictable, passive, unaware. I smiled and dropped the subject. Inside, I was already preparing for the moment everything would collapse. 2 weeks later, Susan called me. We found something, she said. What? I asked. Your husband's second identity, she replied, is tied to a pending business deal. My heart raced. He's about to cash out, she added, and leave when I asked. Susan paused. Thursday, she said. Of course. Thursday, the day he never worked late, the day he thought I was fooled. That night, as Mark slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't angry. I was ready, because when Thursday came, he wouldn't be the only one walking away. Thursday morning arrived quietly. Too quietly. Mark kissed my cheek before leaving. The same routine smile on his face, the same lie sitting comfortably behind his eyes. He told me he'd be late, told me not to wait up, told me he loved me. I smiled back and told him to drive safe, and for the first time since I married him, I meant something different when I said goodbye. The kids went to school, the house went silent. I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized anymore. Not because I was broken, but because I was finally awake. By 9:30 a.m. I was sitting in Susan's office. Daniel was there too. So was Emily. None of us spoke at first. There was nothing left to explain. We were four people bound together by one man's carefully constructed lies. Susan broke the silence. At noon, she said calmly, "Your husband is scheduled to finalize the transfer of funds tied to that business identity. Once it clears, he plans to disappear from your financial structure." I exhaled slowly, and after that, I asked, "He files for separation within weeks," she replied, claiming emotional distance, mutual drifting, no fault. Emily let out a shaky breath. "He told me he'd be free by summer." Daniel clenched his jaw. "He told my sister the same thing once." The room felt heavy with patterns repeating themselves. Susan looked at me. "You can stop this, but only today." I nodded. "I'm ready." At 11:47 a.m., Mark walked into the downtown office building where his deal was scheduled to close. He had no idea that every document he planned to sign had already been flagged. He had no idea that the second identity he relied on so confidently was now fully exposed. And he certainly had no idea that the woman he thought he was leaving behind had already stepped several moves ahead of him. At 11:58 a.m., Susan made the call. At 12:02 p.m., the transfer was frozen. At 12:04 p.m., Mark's phone started vibrating nonstop. He didn't answer. At 12:10 p.m., I received my first call from him. I didn't answer either. By 12:30 p.m., he was panicking. By 1 p.m., he was driving home. I watched his car pull into the driveway from the living room window. He didn't even take off his jacket when he came inside. "What did you do?" he demanded. I set my coffee down slowly. "I protected myself," I said calmly. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. "You went through my things," he accused. "You went through my life," I replied. Silence fell between us, thick and suffocating. He laughed suddenly. "You don't understand how this works." I stood up. "Oh, I do," I said. "You just never thought I would." His face changed then. The charm disappeared. The mask cracked. "You're overreacting," he said sharply. "This is complicated." "No," I replied. "This is calculated." He tried another approach. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I just needed time." I shook my head. "You had 12 years. He sat down heavily. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "That was when I finally lost my patience." "You didn't mean to get caught," I said. His mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing left. I handed him the folder, the documents, the accounts, the second name, the lease, the burner phone records. "I know everything," I said, "including Thursday." His shoulders slumped. For the first time, Mark looked small. "I wanted a clean start." He whispered. "So did I," I replied. "That's why I already took one." He looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said evenly, "that the money you were planning to disappear with is no longer accessible without my consent." His face drained of color. "And it means," I continued, "that if you try to run, every identity you've built comes with you." "You wouldn't," he said weakly. I stepped closer. "I already did." That night, Mark slept in the guest room. The house felt different, lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because the lies were. Emily called me later. "He tried calling me," she said softly. "Did you answer?" I asked. "No," she replied. "I blocked him." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Daniel sent me a message shortly after. "My sister would be proud of you." I sat alone in the living room, listening to the quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Because, for the first time since a stranger sat across from me in a cafe and told me my husband made a huge mistake, I finally understood. The mistake wasn't meeting me. The mistake was underestimating me. The days after Thursday felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's life. Mark avoided me at first. He stayed in the guest room, left early, came home late, and spoke only when absolutely necessary. The confident man who once controlled every narrative now moved through the house, like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. But the silence didn't last. On Sunday evening, he finally sat across from me at the kitchen table. No anger, no charm, just exhaustion. "You ruined everything," he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something surprising. I felt nothing. "No," I replied calmly. "I stopped you from ruining me." He scoffed. "You think this is over." "I know it is," I said. He leaned back, studying me like I was a stranger. Maybe, in a way, I was. You don't even know the whole story, he said. I folded my hands. Then tell it. For once, he hesitated, then began. He told me about his childhood, about instability, about learning early that survival meant adaptation, reinvention, leaving before being left. I never planned to hurt anyone, he said. I just moved forward. I listened without interrupting, and when things started to feel heavy, he continued. I created space, another version of myself. I nodded. You didn't create space. You created wreckage. He looked down. What happens now? He asked. I took a breath. Now we tell the truth. The following week, the consequences started rolling in. Susan filed legal motions to secure assets. The frozen transfer triggered an audit. The second identity, once hidden, was now flagged across multiple systems. Mark lost his deal. Then, he lost his job, not because of the affair, but because of the deception. Companies don't like liabilities, neither do banks, neither do partners. He came home one afternoon and dropped his keys on the counter. They know, he said flatly. Yes, I replied. They do. His voice cracked. You didn't have to destroy me. I met his gaze. You destroyed yourself, I said. I just stopped covering for you. That night, I told the kids the truth, gently, carefully, without blame. Their confusion broke my heart. But not as much as lying to them would have. Mark moved out weeks later. No dramatic goodbye, no final argument. Just boxers and silence. Emily sent me a message that same day. Tried to explain. She wrote, I didn't let him. I replied with one sentence. Neither did I. Months passed. Life didn't magically become easier, but it became clearer. I slept better. I breathed deeper. I stopped second-guessing my instincts. One afternoon, Daniel asked if we could meet again. We sat in the same cafe where everything had started. I wanted to thank you, he said. For what? I asked. For ending a pattern, he replied. My sister never got closure, but you did something she couldn't. I swallowed hard. Did I? I asked. He nodded. You didn't just survive him, you exposed him. As I walked out of that cafe, I realized something powerful. The stranger who warned me hadn't come into my life to break it. He came to wake me up. The divorce was finalized quietly, no courtroom drama. No public spectacle. Just signatures and an ending. Mark tried reaching out once more. I never meant to lose everything, he wrote. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Because here's the truth, I finally understood. He didn't lose everything, he lost control. And that was the difference. Today, my life looks different. Not perfect, but honest. I no longer ignore red flags. I no longer shrink to keep someone else comfortable. And I no longer confuse love with loyalty to a lie. Sometimes, I think about that moment in the cafe, the stranger's voice, calm and certain. Your husband made a huge mistake. He was right, but not for the reason I first believed. The mistake wasn't betraying me. The mistake was assuming I'd never find my strength. The strangest part wasn't the divorce papers. It wasn't the empty side of the closet or the quiet mornings without Mark's routine. The strangest part was how calm everything felt after the chaos settled. For years, my body had been living in a low-grade state of anxiety without my mind realizing it. I'd blamed stress, parenting, work, life. But once Mark was gone, something inside me unclenched. I stopped flinching when phones buzzed. I stopped wondering why silence felt heavy. I stopped trying to read moods that were never meant to be read. And that's when the truth really started to surface. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Susan called me again. Her tone was professional, but there was an edge to it. There's something else, she said. My stomach tightened instinctively. What now? Mark's second identity triggered more than just a financial review, she explained. It opened doors neither of us expected. I closed my eyes. How bad? She paused. Bad enough that federal agencies are involved. I felt a cold wave move through me. What did he do? I asked. Not crimes in the dramatic sense, she said carefully, but patterns, misrepresentation, business structures built on omissions, enough to raise serious questions. After I hung up, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. I thought about the man I'd married, about how carefully he chose words, how selectively he shared his past, how often he reinvented details that never quite added up. I wondered how many versions of him existed, and how many people had trusted each one. A few days later, Daniel called. I wanted you to hear it from me, not through rumors, he said. Hear what? I asked. He's being investigated, Daniel replied, not just financially, personally. I exhaled slowly. Rebecca, I said, this is about her, isn't it? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, her case was reopened. My chest tightened. For years, Daniel continued, what happened to her was written off as emotional fallout. No one ever looked closely at the timeline, the promises, the pressure. I swallowed hard. And now, he said, they're realizing Mark left, more damaged than he ever admitted. I hung up the phone and cried. Not for Mark, for Rebecca, for Linda, for Emily, for myself, for all the women who stood in front of him believing they were special, believing they were chosen, when in reality, they were just the next chapter in a pattern he never planned to break. A week later, Mark showed up at the house, unannounced. I opened the door, and barely recognized him. He looked thinner, tired, stripped of the confidence that once carried him. I just need to talk, he said quietly, stepped outside and closed the door behind me. You can talk, I said, but you can't come in. He nodded. They're asking questions, he said. People I don't know. They keep bringing up my past. I didn't respond. You told them, didn't you? He asked. I met his eyes. I told the truth. He laughed weakly. You don't understand what you've started. I tilted my head. No. You don't understand what you avoided for years. His voice dropped. I never meant to hurt anyone. I held his gaze. Intent doesn't erase impact. He looked away. They're asking about Rebecca, he said. I felt my chest ache. They should, I replied. He shook his head slowly. She was fragile. No, I said firmly. She was honest, and you punished her for it. That was the moment he broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, he just sagged, like a structure that had finally lost its support beams. I don't know who I am without running, he whispered. I felt something unexpected then. Not pity, clarity. That's not my problem anymore, I said gently. He looked at me like he wanted to argue. Then he realized there was nothing left to say as he walked away. I felt something close behind me for the first time in years. Peace. Months passed. Life rebuilt itself in quiet ways. School schedules, grocery lists, new routines. I started therapy not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I'd ignored my instincts for so long. The answer surprised me. I hadn't been weak. I'd been loyal, and loyalty, without truth, can be dangerous. One afternoon, Emily emailed me. I just wanted you to know, she wrote. I ended everything completely. Therapy, new city, clean slate. I smiled as I read it. She'd learned, so had I. Daniel sent me another message weeks later. They're moving forward, he wrote. Rebecca's story will finally be heard. I closed my eyes and whispered her name. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's stronger. Today, when I think about the stranger who sat across from me in that cafe, I don't think of him as a stranger anymore. I think of him as a messenger, a reminder that truth doesn't always come from the people closest to us. Sometimes it comes from someone brave enough to speak when silence would be easier. You've ever felt that quiet warning in your chest? If you've ever ignored a feeling because love told you to, if you've ever been made to feel crazy for asking questions, you're not alone, and you're not wrong. Time has a strange way of revealing things you didn't even know you were missing. Though I didn't know to call it that yet, Mark had become someone who existed mostly in paperwork and memory. Court emails, school logistics, the occasional stiff message about schedules or documents. Nothing personal, nothing emotional. And that was the point. I had learned that healing doesn't always come with loud breakthroughs. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as normal days that no longer feel heavy. Still, the ripples of what Mark had done hadn't fully settled. One afternoon, I received a certified letter. I knew, before opening it, that it wasn't good news. Inside was a formal request from investigators asking if I would be willing to give a statement regarding Mark's past business practices and personal relationships, specifically concerning representations he made while married, and any knowledge I had of alternate identities. I sat at the kitchen table, letter spread open, heart steady but alert. Years ago, this would have terrified me now. It didn't, because truth has weight, but lies are heavier. I called Susan. You don't have to, she said immediately. Legally, You're protected. I know, I replied, but I want to. She paused. Why? I looked out the window at my kids playing in the yard. Because silence is how this keeps happening, I said. The interview took place in a neutral office building downtown. No drama, no accusations, just questions. Dates, conversations, patterns. They didn't ask me how I felt. They asked me what I knew. And for the first time, my clarity mattered more than my pain. When they asked if I'd ever suspected Mark was living under another name before Daniel warned me, I answered honestly. No, I said, but I suspected something was missing. They nodded like they'd heard that before. When they asked why I stayed as long as I didn't apologize. Because he was convincing, I said, and because I believed commitment meant patience. That answer seemed to land. When it was over, one of the investigators walked me to the door. You'd be surprised how many stories like yours we hear, he said quietly. I met his eyes. You'd be surprised how many women blame themselves for them. He didn't argue. That night, I slept deeply, not because justice had been served, but because I had finally spoken without fear. A few weeks later, Mark tried one last time. Not with anger, not with manipulation, with nostalgia. He emailed me photos from early in our marriage, a vacation, a birthday, a candid moment that once meant everything. I wish we could go back, he wrote. I stared at the screen for a long time, then I deleted the message, because going back wasn't healing, it was erasing lessons I'd paid dearly to learn. Emily reached out again around that time. I ran into him, she wrote. He tried to tell me you turned everyone against him. I exhaled slowly and typed back. I didn't turn anyone against him. I stopped protecting a lie, she replied with a single line. That makes sense now. Daniel and I met once more, not in a cafe this time, but at a small park near the water, the same kind of place where truth feels lighter somehow. They'll likely move forward with formal action, he said. Not just because of you, because of patents. I nodded. I hope Rebecca finally gets peace. Daniel smiled sadly. I think she already did. You carried her story when she couldn't. That stayed with me. I hadn't known Rebecca. I hadn't known Linda. I hadn't known Emily before all of this, but I knew something now that connected us all. We weren't foolish. We weren't weak. We were targeted by someone who mistook trust for opportunity. And that distinction matters. As months passed, my life continued expanding, not outward in dramatic ways, but inward. I laughed more easily. I trusted my instincts again. I stopped explaining myself to people who hadn't lived my life. One evening, my daughter asked me something that caught me off guard. Mom, she said, how did you know when it was time to stop believing him? I thought carefully before answering. I didn't stop believing him all at once, I said. I started believing myself. She nodded like that made sense. And maybe that was the real ending of this story. Not exposure, not revenge, but reclamation. Mark's choices followed him. Mine stayed with me. And that was the difference between surviving a lie and outgrowing it. I used to think closure was something someone else gave you. An apology, an explanation, a moment where the other person finally admits what they did and why. But that's not how it really works. Closure is something you take. By the time everything with Mark was officially finished, the investigations, the paperwork, the quiet consequences that followed him like a shadow, I had already moved on internally. Not because I forgot, but because I understood. One morning, months after the last document was signed, I woke up and realized something felt different. Not lighter in a dramatic way, just steady. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the neighborhood come to life. Kids waiting for buses, neighbors walking dogs, ordinary moments that used to pass me by while my mind was busy compensating for someone else's secrets. And for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for anything. No emotional shift, no sudden explanation, no other shoe waiting to drop, just peace. That's when it hit me. The stranger didn't just warn me about my husband. He warned me about myself, about how easy it is to accept partial truths when we're afraid of losing the life we recognize, about how often women are taught to doubt their instincts in the name of being understanding or patient or loyal. Mark didn't outsmart me. He relied on my silence. And when that silence ended, everything else followed. I never heard from him again after that last message I deleted. No apology, no accountability, just distance. And honestly, that was fitting. because men like him don't seek forgiveness. They seek new beginnings, without consequences. What surprised me was how many people quietly came forward after the truth became public, not to gossip, but to say things like, "I always felt something was off," or "I'm glad you trusted yourself," or "I wish I'd done what you did sooner." Those conversations mattered more than any official outcome, because they reminded me this wasn't just my story. It was a pattern, and patterns only break when someone refuses to keep playing their part. I changed after all of this, but not in the way people expect. I didn't become bitter. I didn't shut myself off. I didn't stop believing in love. I stopped believing in excuses. I stopped explaining red flags away. I stopped shrinking to make someone else comfortable in a lie. Instead, I taught my children something I never learned growing up: that love without honesty isn't love, that trust doesn't mean blindness, and that walking away from deception is not failure, it's strength. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Rebecca, about how her voice was almost erased by someone else's need to escape responsibility, and I think about how many women never get a warning. That's why I chose to tell this story, not because it's dramatic, but because it's real, and because somewhere, someone is sitting in their own version of that cafe, feeling a knot in their chest they can't explain yet. If that's you, hear this clearly. Pay attention to the discomfort. Listen when something doesn't add up. And never assume you're too much for wanting honesty. The stranger who warned me didn't save my marriage. He saved my future. And in the end, my husband's biggest mistake wasn't betraying me. It was assuming I would stay quiet once I knew the truth. If this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect, or if you saw a piece of yourself in it, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach people who need them. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment below. Not for me, for the person reading who needs to know they're not alone. Because sometimes, one voice telling the truth is enough to change everything.